Okay, this is for students that were absent this past week. We did a presentation, or I did a presentation on Renaissance artists and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So, I wanted to do a quick video of this to get up on the website. So, if you happen to miss that day, there was no worksheet or anything that went with it, but I wanted to give you a chance to see it. Also, if you're watching this video, you're lucky enough to see me as I'm going from my full beard that I've been growing since Christmas to no beard or mustache at all. And I like to mess around and shave off just various parts of it before I get it all gone, just to annoy my wife. So if you look, there's a side view. I don't know how well you can see in the dark here. But right now I just have a big, long Fu Manchu mustache and long sideburns. Unfortunately, my wife is at work, and so she's not here. I got to keep it till the morning, till she gets home from work, so I can annoy her a little bit before I get rid of the rest of it. So, all right, we'll go ahead and get started here. And you might be asking, what do the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have to do with Renaissance artists? But I think you probably already know the answer to that if you think just a little bit. Here are our heroes. I'm sure many of you, when you were little, used to watch the Ninja Turtles, the cartoons on TV or the movies. I know my kids did. And as a quick reminder, the names of the Ninja Turtles are Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. And when you're little and you watch this show, you got to know who was who by two things: the color of the sash that they wore around their eyes, their mask, and the type of weapon that they use. And to be honest, for the life of me, I've never been able to remember who's who. I think maybe this is Michelangelo with the orange and the nunchucks, and I think this is Leonardo in the blue with the samurai swords, but I could be mistaken. Now, the important question is, who are these men in real life? And of course, they were all great Renaissance artists: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael. And so I want to just take a chance to show you a little bit of the artwork that these men produced during the Renaissance, and much of this artwork is still considered to be some of the greatest artwork ever produced. That's a sketch of Leonardo da Vinci and a painting of Michelangelo, and there's a statue of Donatello and a painting of Raphael. So these are what the men actually look like. And again, they lived over 500 years ago, so hairstyles were different. They really had some long beards back then. Now here are some examples of their work. This is just a portion of one of Michelangelo's most famous works. It's painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which we'll see a little bit more. There's the Sistine Chapel itself. So this is in Rome, in Vatican City, and in this chapel, this small church, all the sides of the walls are painted with murals, and all across the ceiling, Michelangelo painted pictures. They built a big scaffolding, and he laid on his back and painted the ceiling here. There's one of Raphael's paintings, probably the most recognizable painting in the history of the world, the Mona Lisa, by Leonardo da Vinci. Michelangelo was also a sculptor. Another one of Raphael's paintings. And maybe Leonardo da Vinci's second most famous work, The Last Supper. So a little bit more about Leonardo da Vinci. The Mona Lisa, The Last Supper are his two most famous paintings. But he's also known for the sketch of Vitruvian Man that we've seen before. I think it was in our book or in one of our other presentations. Leonardo da Vinci was multi-talented, had multiple interests, and he was interested in the anatomy of the human body. He was interested in medicine, and so he did a lot of studies of the human body and did a lot of sketches like Vitruvian Man that we saw. Here's a little closer look at the Sistine Chapel that Michelangelo painted, and this part right, let me see if I can get to where we can see it. This panel right here is the panel that I showed you the close-up of. God, this is a representation of God here reaching out towards a man here, and again, here's a close-up of, oh, it's coming. A close-up of the two hands. Now, this is painted directly on the plaster on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, so you'll see the cracks that have formed over the years. Another thing that Michelangelo was known for was being an architect, and this is St. Peter's Basilica, again at the Vatican, and he designed the dome He was the architect that planned this dome and how it would be built. Donatello was known as a sculptor. There's two of his famous sculptures, the statue of St. George and the statue of Gattamelata, is my guess of how to pronounce it. I don't speak Italian, but I think that's probably right. Raphael was primarily a painter. And we've got the School of Athens is one of his more famous paintings here, and which is kind of interesting because, as we've talked about, excuse me. Let me get those pictures back up for you. This, as I just was saying, is the School of Athens. And if you remember, the Renaissance was a period of a rediscovery of the works of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. And Raphael ended up doing a painting of his depiction of ancient Greece. Athens, of course, was in ancient Greece. And so these are a bunch of the scholars that he had studied. And if I'm not mistaken, right here, we actually have a cameo appearance that I believe is supposed to be Michelangelo. So even though, of course, Michelangelo didn't live during, or maybe it was Leonardo da Vinci. Even though Leonardo didn't live during ancient Greek times, of course, Raphael, in tribute to him, threw him into his picture of the School of Athens, his depiction of what ancient Greece looked like, all the great minds that had influenced the Renaissance. And here we also see some other, a chapel and deliverance of St. Peter. Again, the church was financing a lot of the art still at this time, so much of the art that you see the Renaissance artists doing are based on the Bible. Okay, moving away from artists and into literature, William Shakespeare was a famous English poet and playwright, and many believe or think of Shakespeare as the greatest writer in the English language. Some of his more famous works: Julius Caesar, Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, Henry V, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Taming of the Shrew, Much Ado About Nothing, The Merchant of Venice. And he wrote in a couple of different genres, I guess you could say, if we're going to use our English terms. Julius Caesar, it was a historical play. So he wrote some of his plays based on history. Other plays that he wrote, like Romeo and Juliet, were tragedies. Let's see if I can spell tragedy. Where they don't have a happy ending. You know, when you get to the end of Romeo and Juliet, they don't run off happily and live happily ever after. It's one of those plays, just like you go to some movies sometimes, and at the end, everything doesn't wrap up nice and neat. There's a really sad ending, and that's known as a tragedy. And Shakespeare wrote a number of tragedies along with histories, and he was also very good at writing comedies. And The Taming of the Shrew would be an example of one of his comedies. Now, many of Shakespeare's works, even though you can still see the original plays performed all over the world, they also get remade by Hollywood. So here's some examples of places you may have seen some of Shakespeare's stories retold. 10 Things I Hate About You, which is based on The Taming of the Shrew. O, another movie which was based on the story of Othello. Scotland PA is a movie based on Macbeth. Now here's one that I think all of you have probably seen. The Lion King is based on Hamlet. West Side Story was a musical based on Romeo and Juliet, and more recently, if you've seen Romeo and Juliet, that's of course based on Shakespeare's story of Romeo and Juliet as well. So here's some of the cover art. So maybe if you run across these, you'll go ahead and rent them or watch them on TV if you see them. There's the cover art for O, West Side Story, and Scotland PA. Okay, this wraps up this very quick presentation. Again, we didn't take notes. It was just more of a chance to expose you to some of the art of the artists of the Renaissance.